Hello and welcome to Aladdin TechTips. Today I'll be showing you how to create and use nested loops in Java. So grab your favorite IDE and let's begin. So first what you want to do is import java.io. And what this will allow us to do is import a buffered reader with a input stream reader. So first we need a public class. We'll call this nested loop. And then public method, public static void main string args. And we're going to use a throws statement here, throws exception, because if we don't, we're going to get an error. So now we're going to utilize that import java.io by importing the buffered reader. Buffered reader in equals new. So what in is the object name. So whenever we want to call upon it, we just use in, and then whatever function we want it to perform. So buffered reader in equals new buffered reader new input stream reader. Now we're going to use system.in. So it utilizes the object of the buffered reader. The input stream reader will utilize the object of the buffered reader. So now that we have the imports out of the way, we're going to start with our integers. So our first integer is going to be called rows, int rows, and the second integer is going to be called int columns. Okay, now we have our integers, and now we need to make a name for our program. So I'm going to call this not.println. I'm going to call this Aladdin's rectangle cookie maker. Cookie maker 2000, just for the fun of it. Next, we're going to prompt the user to enter the value we want for the rows. So please enter the value for rows. And then this is the important part. We're going to save the user input to the integer. So integer rows equals integer dot parse int. And parse int is what allows us to store the integer. So now we're going to use in.readline. So in is the buffered reader and the input stream reader. And what it's going to do is it's going to read the line for us that the user has entered. Next, we're going to do the same for the columns. System.out.println, prompt the user to enter a value. Please enter the value for columns. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, do the same thing with the integer. So column equals integer dot parse int in dot readline, again calling on the buffered reader, and end it off with a semicolon. So to recap, we have imported Java, imported a buffered reader, and we have made our integers, a prompt message, and a name for our program. So now, this is the fun part. This is where the nested loop begins. So you can do it two ways, using a while loop or a for loop. I prefer using the for loops. So for int, so we're creating a new integer, int r equals 0. This is the initial value for this integer that we have called r, 0. R equals less than rows. So as long as r is less than rows, rows is going to be whatever the user has entered, so a number like 5. So as long as r is less than 5, it's going to keep incrementing by 1 until it reaches 5 and prints out the object we want it to 5 times. Now this is where the nested loop happens. Now we create another for loop inside this for loop. So for int, let's call this one c equals 0. That's the initial value, and now we have C, the condition, and C is less than columns, then C should increment up by 1. And now in these curly braces, for this for statement, we're gonna print out the object that we want to print out. So you can use anything, but for this video I'm gonna use the multiplication symbol. So system.out.println, and multiplication symbol, close the bracket, and there we go. And now after you close this bracket, you go for this one. So the first for statement. And inside there, what this will do is make rows, and it will do that by adding new lines after a certain number to be precise. The columns have been printed out. So we're going to print out system.out.println, not println, print, same thing for this one. I apologize for this. Print, and here, and then we're going to print out a new line. And now everything we have should work. And let's recap. So first we imported java.io to use the buffered reader object. Then we have our class, we have our main method, and throws exception. And we need this because without it, let me just comment this out, let's just delete it, we would get an error, 2 errors. 1, 2, unhandled exception, type IO exception. So now that we have throws exception back, they should disappear. And they have. Now, we imported the buffered reader to get the user input. Next, we declared our variables, and we gave our little program a name. Very simple, system.out.println. Then we prompted the user to enter a value for our integer rows. And then rows, we stored it, was stored into, actually the user input was stored into rows. And then we have another prompt message for the second integer that asks the user to enter a value for columns. And we did user input, and we stored it into the columns variable. Then we made our first for loop, and what this did is allowed us to print out the rows. And just to be even more clear, int r equals 0 is the initial value, semicolon. R is less than rows is the condition, semicolon. And then r plus plus is the increment. And then we created another for loop inside the previous already existing for loop. We did the same thing for that. Initial value, condition, and oops, and increment. Now that we have that, this prints out the columns. And then system.out.println is the object that we want to print out, and this goes in the for loop for columns, or your second for loop, whatever you decide to call it. And this is the object that is printed out. Then for the first for loop, we use it to create another line. Same amount of lines as the user has entered. That's why we use rows over here. So this creates the rows. And then this closes the first for loop. Second one's already closed. This closes the main method, and this closes the class. Now that we have reviewed it, let's Control S, save the file, and let's run it. Okay, so Aladdin's rectangle cookie maker. Please enter the value for rows. So let's say we want 5 rows, and we want 5 columns. And it should print out a shape similar to this. It's not a real good shape, but I mean, works. Cookie, rectangle cookie. You can print out any shape you want, so just go here, change this shape to heart, and then run it again. Enter 5 by, let's say, 3, and as you can see, there's 5 rows and 3 columns. We entered 5 for rows, 3 for columns, and it prints it out. So, thank you for watching my video, and I hope it has helped you, and have a nice day.